Home ownership was the goal. It was the big financial goal for many people, most people. Rising prices gave the illusion that it was a no risk way to build wealth. And renting was just this temporary thing that you had to do while you socked away enough for that down payment. Well, a lot of things are changing. So, first, home prices are out of reach for many people. And second, prices is in many areas of the country have actually taken a dip. So the kind of the security benefit there has been diminished somewhat. Kari Norman is a senior economist at Desjardins, and she recently published a study examining something called the rise of the permanent renter. And that is the focus of our conversation today. Kari, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me on your show.
What do you mean the permanent renter? What does that phrase mean in this context?
Sure. Well, traditionally, we used to think of renting, as you say, as this stopgap measure between when you move out of mom and dad's house, maybe you're going to post-secondary, maybe you're starting your new job, and you save up for a few years, and then you buy your starter home or a condo or wherever you live to begin with that you purchase. But now, many cities in Canada, in particular Toronto and Vancouver, are just becoming so unaffordable to get your foot in the door that this is no longer a stopgap for just a few years. People are renting well through their 30s and well into their 40s.
Hmm. What do you interpret from the data? So is this trend increasing? And is the hypothesis around the cost of or the more recent risk of owning a home?
Yeah, that's a great question. And even though affordability has improved in the least affordable cities like Toronto and Vancouver, it's still historically unaffordable. So it's not as bad as it was like 3 years ago when mortgage rates were at their peak and home prices were also at their peak. In that time, home prices have come down somewhat. And of course, interest rates have also gotten better. But affordability is still a lot worse than it was compared to pre-COVID levels.
What would you say in terms of percentages? Like what are some specifics that we would anchor to about how this trend is unfolding in Canada?
Sure. International benchmarks would say that if you look at the price of purchasing a home relative to your total family's income, that three times income is considered affordable. Anything under three times would be great. Four times is starting to get into the unaffordable range. Nine times income is considered impossibly unaffordable. And in Toronto and Vancouver right now, we're in sort of like the 10 to 12 times income. So it's just really unaffordable on the average. Of course, not every home is priced at the average. You can find homes for less or a lot more. But on average, these cities are quite unaffordable.
Mm. In a global context, there are many places in the world, expensive places, where renting is just the way that it's done. So I would highlight Switzerland, Germany, South Korea. These are markets in which half the population rents. What is the difference in terms of dollars or culture that has some countries be super like must buy a house and other countries be like you can actually live a long and happy life being a renter?
Yeah, a lot of that comes down to culture. And we see that across Canada too, where Quebec, families are much more likely to rent than in English Canada. And despite Quebec being quite a bit more affordable than the rest of Canada. So this is a choice that people are making to rent. And in some ways, it can be a very wise choice. If you have a job where you move regularly, or if you think, well, maybe in a few years we'll start a family and then we need a bigger place, so we don't want to get stuck in something really tiny right now. Renting can be a great option for those types of situations.
What would you say, from your perspective as an economist, is the wealth outcome story here of renting versus owning? And I ask because if you were to talk to anybody in the real estate sector, they would say, you got to buy. Other people would say, I actually think equities are going to outperform housing over the course of the next couple of days. So they've got skin in the game on
Mm.
either side. I think that as an economist, you're probably able to just engage more deeply in the data. What would you say about the insight on wealth outcomes?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, say past performance is no predictor of future performance,
Yeah,
whether it's housing or stock markets.
yeah,
Um, so, uh, so we can't really make a blanket statement, but um, I would say you can have a great outcome either way. And whether renting is a choice that you make consciously as a preference to buying, or whether you're in a place that is just not going to be affordable to you and you end up renting as a matter of circumstance. Um, there are great options either way. But the thing that is really lacking in Toronto and Vancouver is appropriate family-sized rental
mm,
accommodation. So as compared to, say, Montreal or other places, if you think about continental Europe and you're walking uh, through residential neighborhoods, you see a lot of low-rise apartments, flex style housing like duplex, triplex, quads, and so on. And you walk through Toronto, and we don't see a lot of that. Um, and so the statistics are really showing that uh, in Toronto and Vancouver, more than in Montreal or the rest of Canada, renters are more likely to live in apartments with an insufficient number of bedrooms for the size of their family. So this
right.
is where we really need to focus because, um, of course, we've heard the government say we need to double the pace of home building. We need to build up to 500,000 new homes per year, which would be a lot. That would be great if we could do that. Um, but those are just strictly numbers, and they're not looking at the makeup of housing. So really trying to be more conscious, particularly in these cities where people are more likely to rent, to ensure that they have that ability to live in a place that suits their needs.
I am a big believer in the magic of supply and demand. I remember fondly both my macro and microeconomics courses throughout my undergrad. Where do you think economics falls down on the housing question? And I ask because if we talk about major centers, there is an incredible mismatch between what an apartment that's or a condo someone wants to live in, apartment or condo someone wants to live in, and what has been historically profitable. So in Toronto, where I live, there's lots of towers and they're filled with 500 square feet condos that no one really wants to live in. So it seems like a mismatch in terms of what the consumer wants to buy versus what the investor has got available to sell.
Sure. And I also live and work in Toronto, so I am aware of those high rises too. Um, and I would say that investors were the buyers in condos for many years. And that really filled in a gap because Canada wasn't making a lot of purpose-built rental accommodation for a long time, and just let small investors fill in that gap of developers building and investors buying these studio and one-bedroom apartments because that's where the demand was into renting out these small units because there wasn't enough rental in the market. And now, of course, we're in a different era in Toronto where uh, newcomers to Canada have really cut back in the last year or so based on federal policy. And so there isn't as much demand for these small units. We have fewer international students, again, because of federal policy. And so those are harder to sell now. But the timeline for building, the things that are being built now were things that were purchased 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So the things that are in demand now in terms of high rises, like they won't be livable for another 6, 7 years.
I'm going to ask you a tough question, and this is just a fabricated scenario of a 27-year-old who has got a job. They are saving their money. What wisdom would you have for them in terms of the merits to socking away every single penny for that down payment, or taking the equivalent amount of money and thinking about investing it for the long term and just saying out of the gate, I'm going to be a permanent renter?
This hits very close to home because my eldest is 26.
Okay.
So very good scenario.
Perfect.
We have had these conversations around the dining room table. Um, so as parents, if we want to help our kids, providing that place for them to live at home for low rent or rent free, as long as both the parent and adult child are willing to do that, can really help give those young adults a leg up. Because if they're not spending $2,000 a month on rent, that's $2,000 a month they can sock away, as long as they're
Yeah.
doing that intentionally and not, going on great vacations and so on with that 2,000 a month. Um, so, um, so that's one way families can help. We're also seeing a greater prevalence of parents and grandparents and other relatives helping with that first down payment to get adult kids into the door. But and then we're also seeing a lot of people move out of Toronto and
Mm.
Vancouver because it's just too expensive. So if you have a career in something that you can work anywhere, like a teacher or an electrician or a hairdresser, those are in demand across the country. So you don't necessarily have to live and work in Toronto. And this is where we get that sort of drive till you qualify kind of phrase, where we see a lot of young people moving out of the city in order to get their foot in the door, and especially if they want ground-oriented housing with a backyard.
Drive till you qualify. I haven't heard that term before, but it's a very visual image and I can picture it. My kid doesn't have their driver's license. They're only 16 and a half, but they say they'll never get it because they live in a metro area. Maybe they're going to need it just so they can drive till they qualify to find a home somewhere. Kari, thank
Well,
you
my
for joining.
youngest is the same age,
Yeah,
so
okay.
yeah.
Thank you for joining us to talk about this. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
Kari Norman is a senior economist at Desjardins. She was talking about a recent study that she and her group did on the rise of the permanent renter in Canada.